Welcome to our discussion of Meditation 4. Meditation 4 is fairly straightforward and contains only one main argument. There are just three main things we want to extract from this meditation. First, we want to understand why there is an issue with error. Why is this meditation, as Descartes titles it in this translation, concerning the true and the false? Second, we want to know not only why is there a problem, well, what exactly is the problem? And we're going to call that problem the problem of error. What is the problem of error? And finally, of course, we'll want to know Descartes' solution to the problem of error. And if we extract these three things from this meditation and our discussion, then I think we'll be doing quite well. All right, so let's think back to third meditation, or meditation 3. And let's just recall that in meditation 3, Descartes proves that God exists and that God is not a deceiver. Now remember that for Descartes, God is the one supremely perfect being. God is the sum total of all positive attributes unified in one being. And that includes the attribute of being a creator. So the God that Descartes has proven exists in Meditation 3 is precisely the God that created the mind of the thinker. And the thinker, of course, knows that his or her mind exists from Meditation 2. But now this creator that is God is not a deceiver, and so cannot be responsible for the mistakes that the thinker makes. And yet the thinker does make mistakes. And this is precisely the problem. How can it be that I am created by a supremely perfect being, on the one hand, but on the other hand, that I make mistakes? And it's that particular tension that we can express as a simple argument that we'll call the problem of error. So what is the problem of error? Let's write it out as a simple little argument. The first premise would be this. If God exists and created my mind, then I don't make mistakes. Then I do not make mistakes. The second premise is, I do make mistakes. So, what seems to be the inescapable conclusion here, that someone challenging Descartes' views might be tempted to draw, is that therefore, God does not exist. So you see, this is a problem, of course, only if you're a theist philosopher. And again, the problem is that there seems to be a conflict between the notion that my mind is created by a supremely perfect being and the notion that my mind makes mistakes. Now let's have a slightly closer look at this argument so we can identify what the real issue is here. From a logical point of view, this argument is impeccable. And we can see that by bringing to the surface its logical form. And the easiest way to do that is to use some letters to represent some sentences. Because if you notice here, a number of the sentences are repeated, except maybe when they include the word not in them somehow. For example, the sentence God exists appears here in the first premise, and it also appears in the conclusion, but with the word not in it. And likewise, the sentence I make mistakes, or I do make mistakes, appears as the second premise, and it also appears in the first premise, but with the word not in it. So let's use the letter A to represent the sentence God exists, and let's use the letter B to represent the sentence, I make mistakes, so that I don't make mistakes becomes, it is not the case that be. Now, a simple way of writing it is not the case that be is to just use this symbol for it is not the case that be. And then we can see that the argument has a very simple logical structure that looks like this. If A, then not B, B, therefore not A. And that is the logical form of the argument. Now, what's interesting about this logical form here that I'm going to put in a box is that this logical form is, of course, valid. It is a valid deductive argument, which means that if the premises were true, the conclusion would have to be true. So, if Descartes is taking this challenge seriously and he wants to address it and say, no, look, it's not really a problem, he cannot say it's not really a problem because the objection is illogical. There's nothing illogical about it. The logic of it is perfectly correct. So what he has to do is argue that he has to show that the argument is unsound. And to do that, he has to show that at least one of the premises is false. There's only two premises. Now, it's not very likely that Descartes thought he would have any sort of chance at trying to convince anybody that it's false that I make mistakes. Any rational thinker has had the experience of making a mistake. So it's going to be very difficult to argue that it's false that I make mistakes. And so that pretty much forces Descartes to argue that the first premise is false. And the first premise, if we go back to look at it here in the symbolic form, has a very specific symbolic form. If A, then not B. Now, to show that a statement of this logical form is false, we have to show that A is true and not B is false. Descartes thinks he's already shown that A is true in third meditation. And now what he wants to do is show that it's not the case that I don't make mistakes, even though it's true that I was created by God. Or to say it slightly differently, what Descartes needs to show is that it's not God's fault that I make mistakes. So how is he going to do that? Okay, well, Descartes says it's true that God exists and God created my mind. And in fact, God created my mind with two faculties. The first one that I want to talk about is the intellect, or reason. And what Descartes says about the intellect that God gave us is that he gave us an intellect that is finite. And yet, it's not the intellect by itself that is responsible for error. In other words, when our intellect actually grasps something, when it presents to my mind something for consideration as a possible belief that I can neither accept as true or false, the intellect itself doesn't make a mistake. And here, perhaps Descartes' metaphor of the light of reason might be helpful. When the light of reason shines down on something, it really does display clearly and distinctly. But this light is not infinite. When this light shines down on some things, it won't shine down so that they are presented to my mind clearly and distinctly. But that's not a defect. That's not a reason for me making a mistake, because I still have a choice to make about whether to believe that thing that I don't see so clearly. The second faculty of the mind is a free will, the freedom to choose. And what Descartes says about our freedom to choose is that it is very nearly unbounded. It is, in fact, in this respect that I most closely resemble God. God has complete freedom when it comes to choosing how to act, and more importantly, to choosing what to believe. I might not have complete and total freedom when it comes to my choices about what to believe, but I have a lot of freedom, says Descartes. And my freedom to choose what to believe far exceeds what my intellect displays to my mind clearly and distinctly. So if I wanted to illustrate this somehow, I might do it like this. I might ask us to consider that this circle here represents what my intellect displays to my mind clearly and distinctly. And this box here represents what I'm free to believe, what I can choose to believe freely. Now, error can arise when I choose to believe something that is outside the sphere of what my intellect displays to me clearly and distinctly. So, if I choose to believe something out here in this shaded area, then that's when I can make a mistake. I might not make a mistake. I might get lucky and I might just happen to choose to believe something that happens to be true. But error arises when I mistakenly choose to believe something that I don't perceive clearly and distinctly. So error can arise when I choose to believe something that I do not perceive clearly and distinctly. And that's where error comes from. So it's not God's fault that I make mistakes. It's my fault. It's my fault because I am misusing my freedom. To put it differently, as you'll see in the readings, Descartes says that error can arise when I allow my will to exceed the boundaries of my intellect. I want you to look for a quotation that's very similar to that. Okay? That's when error can creep in to my thinking. And so conversely, says Descartes, I now also know how to avoid error. Avoid error by choosing to believe all and only the things I perceive clearly and distinctly. So to paraphrase one of Descartes' biographers from the early 20th century, if the central question of Meditations on First Philosophy is, what should I believe? You can see that this question is quite meaningful to Descartes because I have a vast amount of freedom concerning what I can believe. What Descartes wants to do is not make the mistake of accepting a belief as true if it's actually false. And now, by the end of fourth meditation, he has a clear prescription of how to do that. You can avoid ever making a mistake in what you believe to be true by believing all and only the things that you perceive clearly and distinctly.